By the way, this just in, but apparently Hamas said today that they are ready to negotiate a ceasefire based on Trump's so-called 21, I believe, point
Yes, and
peace
did you
plan.
see Trump's response?
I think he said that. Sorry, if I'm correct, he said that Israel should stop any
Yes,
sort of military engagement in Gaza. Is that what it was?
yes.
Yeah.
So, should I give the background to what's
Please.
happened?
Yes.
Okay, so we were discussing earlier the Arab states and so on, and their increasing apprehension about where the region is headed. And as you know, last week on the sidelines of the General Assembly, Trump conducted a meeting with a number of Arab leaders and leaders of Muslim states, Turkey, Pakistan, Indonesia, and I think a few others. And at this meeting, they basically told him, this needs to end. It's causing problems for us domestically. It's causing instability and so on. And they worked out a 21-point plan. And it was a plan that I think Hamas would not have had difficulty accepting, particularly if it came under the unified pressure of all these governments on the one hand, and pressure from within its domestic constituency, who were understandably desperate for anything to end this genocide. Then the good ship Netanyahu sails to the United States. Netanyahu meets with Trump, meets with Witkoff and Kushner and so on. And the plan is substantially revised. It's now a 20-point plan. Any reference to the West Bank is removed. It calls for disarmament, all kinds of things that Hamas cannot accept without committing suicide. And that Trump then announced the Netanyahu version of the plan. And if you would have listened to the press conference, the Netanyahu-Trump press conference, at which this proposal was announced, you would have been very challenged, if you didn't know better, to identify which of the two was the Israeli and which of the is the American, because they spoke in exactly the same language, making exactly the same points. And I think Netanyahu's objective was to craft a proposal that Hamas could not accept, and its rejection would then basically serve as a justification or as a pretext by Israel to continue and even intensify the genocide while maintaining full and unconditional U.S. and more broadly Western support. So Hamas was faced with this proposal that it could neither accept nor reject. It couldn't accept it because it couldn't be accepted without basically committing organizational and political suicide. And it couldn't reject it because if it did so, it would be doing so against the unified position of the Arab and Muslim leaders. And it would be seen to be callously disregarding the desperation of its own constituents who understandably, even if they were very cynical about this agreement, were saying, well, even if it's only a temporary pause, that's better than nothing. So the problem for Hamas was that when Netanyahu was allowed by Trump to rewrite this agreement, the Arabs, who were supposedly, speaking of getting very angry, were supposedly furious about this, didn't publicly reject it, and so left Hamas holding the bag of it being the one who needed to take the decision. So its response today was I thought, very interesting. It focused on the issues that mattered most to Trump. It said it accepted that element of the proposal that called for a comprehensive release of all the captives and corpses it holds, and for an end to the war. And then, playing to Trump's narcissistic vanity, it also thanked him personally for having issued this proposal. And then it said, as far as the other elements are concerned, those need to be negotiated and clarified. And there are other elements that are not within Hamas's competence to judge because they need to be governed by either a Palestinian national consensus or international law. And for good measure, even though Trump was demanding an answer by Sunday, they provided their response during the Jewish Sabbath to make it more difficult for the Israelis to come out with an immediate propaganda campaign. So they gave this response. It basically, did everything but nominate Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize, to appeal to his vanity. And then you saw this contest by Israel on the one hand, saying, Hamas has rejected the agreement, which is, of course, what they dearly wanted. And the Arab and Islamic leaders saying, no, Hamas has provided enough of a basis to continue negotiations on clarification so that we have a proper agreement. And Trump, perhaps in part because, he's failed in Ukraine, he's now experiencing a domestic crisis with the government shutdown, and he's a master of diversion and deflection, first posted the Hamas response on his social media, and then posted a statement of his own saying that Hamas has accepted the agreement and that he's ordering Israel to immediately halt its bombings of the Gaza Strip, and that now we have a path towards lasting peace, not only in Gaza, but in the Middle East, and in fact, the entire universe. Typical Trump. Now, I'm old and wise enough to know that you take anything this man says with a grain of salt, and you don't take anything he says seriously until you see actual concrete results on the ground. And even then, you have to bear in mind they can be reversed at any point. I mean, we saw this with the Iran nuclear negotiations. But so now the question becomes, I think Hamas quite intelligently extracted itself from a real dilemma. It was between a very large rock and a very hard place, because it was an agreement it could neither accept nor reject. It was under tremendous pressure, and it has now, at least temporarily, managed to shift the burden to Israel. It's now Israel's move. Will Israel defy Trump? They're certainly still bombing Gaza. But if Israel continues to defy its American master, will Trump, as in the past, go along with it? Or will he actually, do something about it? And that's a question that's going to be answered in the coming hours and days.
Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. You can also apparently hype videos there now. I would appreciate that. Also rate on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Marketing tutorials always insist I have to hassle you about that, so I'm doing it, even though I kind of hate it. Also, if you'd like to, please support me on Patreon. Big help. This is a one-person podcast. I do everything by my little old self. There's no team behind me. Not even one person. Very, very sad. Playing the world's smallest violin, I know, but you can help by hopping on Patreon and finding the Smart Cookies podcast on there and become my producer, one of my producers. Speaking of which, last but certainly not least, I have to thank my existing patrons. Without you, there would be no Smart Cookies, as I always say, which makes you actual producers of this show. So eternal gratitude and thanks go to Richard, Amy Ontz, Mattia Renchel, Florian Hauer, Peter Karba, Matija Zupancic, Dejan Žulnir, Darej, Rok Tržan, Saša Vipotnik, Neven Cvijanović, Juž Premrov, Sirkezi, Goran Ivašić, Anže Sever, Ole, Marin Ferrara, Aljaž Mahar, Štrole, Ajda Mancian, Miha Medved, Medinho, Goran, Gordan, Lorenzo, Juričuk, Mila, Carmen, Veronica, and Tai Chi. I started smiling there in the middle because the list is growing, which makes me super happy. So thanks again. Ciao, ciao.